Good morning, Kathy.
Good morning, Lisa.
So I'm Lisa Mazzonetto, and we are here to record podcast 03
So exciting. Of making change, I guess we should say.
of making
Of
change.
making change, yes. I'm Kathy Godfrey, and we, Lisa and I, are delighted that we have made it this far with the podcast, as we are brand new to the podcast landscape. But we are not new to our message about how folks can transform their own lives. And we're super passionate and excited about that. So that was the genesis of this whole venture. And we're excited that it's progressing and growing.
Absolutely. And we're excited to hear feedback from our listeners. If you're interested in asking us questions or offering us some feedback, we're totally open to that. And I believe that our email addresses are in the comments section. You're welcome to leave us a comment or send us an email if you have a question or want further information.
Yeah, definitely. And we really do want to talk about things that you're asking about. So that'd be really helpful to us to let us know. If you feel fine to post it in the comments, please do. We'll be excited about that. Or if you want to use our email addresses and ask something more personal, and we could then discuss it anonymously for you. Obviously, we wouldn't use your we wouldn't identify you in any way, and we could still talk about your question and explore that.
Yes, and it would be fun to, I know we've talked about as the evolution of this goes on, like having guest speakers or guests in general. And I think it would be fun if we had some of our listeners pose questions that we could, or topics that they may be interested in having us explore.
Yes, so much fun. I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking forward to when that can happen, and we might need to have another meeting and talk about how we're seeing that right now, because I don't think we've actually talked about that in a minute, about having
Mm-hmm.
folks on. And as you know, my ex-husband, who I wrote the book to and about, Addiction in a Nutshell, is going to be here at the end of October. So maybe, I know, we might be able to do something with him while he's here, which would be really fun. And he has already said that he's willing.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And I would actually get to meet the infamous Dale. I would be so excited to do that. So we have to figure it out. That'll be our goal in the next
Yes.
month, is to figure out how we have him on, either through the phone or on Zoom.
Yeah, and we're going to be hanging out, so we could record in the same space. I'm now talking to you like no one's listening.
Right.
I just realized I forgot that we were recording. But yeah, I do want listeners to know, especially those listeners who know us, to know that he's going to be here, and that we are working on having him on, because I know they have a lot of questions for him. People who've read the book and who know about my past. Yeah, they're excited to hear from him. So that will
Yes, I have lots of questions for him too, but I'll reserve those for off recording.
Well, I don't know. We can record the whole thing and then play what we want, right?
Right. I'm so excited to meet Dale. So that's something for us to look forward to.
He is an extraordinary human, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear that segue? It just happened. What we're
It
actually
did. I love how that works.
It did. So what we were wanting to explore today, in terms of definition of self-definition, is, I should say, there are many definitions that we all learned apply to, quote, human. All the things that we've learned about what it means to be human. And it really, I think these kinds of definitions are the ones that are most difficult for us to see, because they're so culturally agreed upon that it doesn't seem like something that can be questioned, right? It seems like, this is what this happens because I'm human, or I behave this way because I'm human, I feel this way because I'm human. All of those stories that we tell. So maybe I should review just really quickly, like what our basic premise is here, and I can do that pretty briefly, I think. So basically, what we see and experience is whatever we're looking for, which is a lot less woo-woo than it sounds. I mean that literally, and in terms of the way your left hemisphere works. So when you learned language, you learned all of the words and definitions, which are concepts. You learned all of that when you learned to speak. And then you saw even new concepts through the lens of those old concepts. Old, not meaning invaluable, just meaning the first ones that you learned. You know, we could say the first programming of that left hemisphere. The book that I mentioned, if you all are interested in seeing if I'm just making this up or if it's a true thing, is How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. She does an extensive and exhaustive study of how we thought emotions were made and then how they actually work, which is synonymous with your experience of the world. That's why you'll hear us sometimes say felt experience, meaning what emotions happen when you have a particular experience. And that's all with that simple statement that I made. You know, you see and experience what you're looking for. The concepts that you learned, they are what is guiding what you're looking for. Because always your left hemisphere scanning the environment, so to speak, and matching what's out there, what seems to be out there, with a concept that's been learned in order to give it context and meaning. We're not trying to stop that from happening. You wouldn't know you ever had another experience if that stopped happening. But what we're saying is, if the concepts that you learned seem to be creating an uncomfortable experience in life for you, you do not have to accept that. That in fact, you can recognize the concept that's creating it. You can look to see if it's true. You can experience that it is not. And then you can look from a different place to have a new experience. That simple.
I love that.
So last time we looked at that in terms, we used addiction and addict as a self-definition example, but we really were talking about how you define yourself. So let's say that you define yourself as an addict by the old definition, which feels shameful. We'll just use that one word to kind of sum it up. Then everything, this is really critical about how this works. Everything you look at comes back to you through that lens of a shameful self-definition. And that's why it seems like who you are, because it's so pervasive, because you can't selectively apply your self-definition. It's like wearing the glasses of a particular color. Everything you look at will be that color. So that's why it's so important and so much fun to recognize that you're seeing through something like that, and then allow it to dissolve, like belief in Santa Claus is our analogy we've been using.
And gosh, as I'm sitting here listening to you, I think of so many of my clients, and I am no different. I have been in a big part of this belief of myself for a long time too, around like so many people walk around believing that they're not good enough, and how everything comes through that lens. And little story real quick I shared with you this morning was how disappointed I am about my builder carrying on with his life and doing some fun things and moving, and how that's going to impact some projects that I had. And just in this moment with you, recognizing like all of the feelings I was having around that was really being fed through that lens of my belief that I'm not good enough, and therefore he's leaving, which really have nothing to do with each other.
Isn't that fun when you see it? It's not fun when you're feeling it and you don't know that's what it is, because the feelings that it creates are so uncomfortable and so real.
Yes.
And it seems like you want to do something. You didn't say this, but if you're unaware of these things, then you want to make him do what you want him to do so that the feeling stops. That's
Yes.
how people are just banging around into each other out there in the world. It's like, oh my God, he's leaving. And so I'm having these feelings. He needs to not leave. So that
Right,
these
right.
feelings will go away. Really, we're all expecting that of each other. You
Yeah.
know, don't live your life. That's making me feel bad.
Mm.
I need you to stay here so that I can feel okay. Now, seriously, that was my personal history forever. That's
Mhm.
the history that brought me here to this place of freedom entirely, because I was so exhausted from trying to get anyone to behave in a way that would allow me to feel good about myself.
Mhm.
Now I know why that's so exhausting, because it's impossible.
It's impossible, right? Right. It makes me think of all the, like, when you've shared with me before about the, I'll get this degree, I'll get this job, I'll get the,
Mhm.
and it was never enough. And yeah, and so yeah, I just had this kind of aha moment. So thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, I love that you did. Do you want to say anything about how it felt when you realized?
Well, and this is something I know we've talked about in a previous podcast, and of course we've talked a lot about it in our own personal conversations with each other. But yeah, there is just this, like, there's this feeling in my body of it's like if I could describe it as feeling a very tight, kind of everything clenched up. And then once you have the awareness, it's just this softening, it's this relief. And it's almost like I've had this experience of, like, almost like my stomach falling out. And kind of like you're riding a
Yeah.
roller coaster, or you go like over a big hill in your car and you're like, woo, I lost my stomach back there. It is this almost like this, just this kind of softening. And, and of course, consciously, I know that my builder moving away, which I'm really thrilled and happy for him, it impacts me in a way that, I'm like, okay, now I have to find someone else. But how, like, seeing it through that lens, really, it's just being, it's freedom, as you often say. It's freedom, right? There it
It
is.
is. It's so free. And when I say that's what I want for everyone, or what the work I do with clients is so that they can be free, what I mean by that is not free from anything, but free to feel the joy that they always have. That's the
Yes.
mind-blowing thing. It's like joy is not a thing that we create. It is, it's the it's the gravity of emotions, it's a principle. It's what's always here. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that we're not paying attention to it when we're seeing through a definition that causes us to feel something
Mm-hmm.
else. Then
Mm.
we think that, oh my God, now I have all this work to do to try to get to joy, or to try to give myself joy. But that's not how it works. As soon as you give up, like in your example here, as soon as you realize that you're seeing this situation through, quote, I'm not good enough, then you have that physical experience of returning to joy. That's what that is. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a little bit, well, I don't know what's off topic because we never know how this is going to go, but just a little side note about about joy that I've been talking about with clients lately is that from seeing the world through your old self-definition, you might be imagining that joy is one single emotion, and you might think it's synonymous with happiness, and it's different from that in both ways. It's not synonymous with happiness, which almost always has the connotation of I'm happy about something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm happy that I did something, saw something. I'm happy that I am something. I'm happy that she's doing this or he said that, or I'm happy that I have a new job or a new house, or it could be anything. I've
Mm-hmm.
become enlightened. That's a joke, because that would be the very definition of not enlightened if I was happy that I was enlightened.
Right, right.
Yeah. So it's not happiness. It's the joy that I'm talking about is free from every circumstance.
Mm.
It's just our normal state of being.
Mm-hmm.
Once we realize that we're defining ourselves apart from it, that's all that's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And on the second point, I would say, it's also not a single emotion. It is this miraculously expansive range of emotion. And I know that sounds crazy because I have to call it something, which is the only reason that I say joy. If I'm trying to share information, I have to call it something. There has to be a concept exchange happening. And so that's why I call it that. But it can be so diverse. For example, not too long ago, I was talking with a friend about her father who was coming near the end of his life. And as I was talking to her about this and about how she could have a beautiful, intimate experience of his transition, I could suddenly feel my oneness with him. That sounds so hokey and mystical, but it's really not. When you start talking deeply about these situations that we mostly want to avoid, like the end of life transition as we define it. But as I was talking about that, I could just feel the intimacy of everything, of him and me and her, and the stories that we tell, and those stories coming to an end, and other stories expanding, and this huge wave of emotion just felt like it just filled this body and then just splashed out beyond it. And there were lots of tears, and I couldn't talk. And if you were watching me from a distance somewhere and you didn't know me, you might be like, oh my gosh, like, look at all that grief, or look how sad she is, or she must be really upset about something, because there was so much energy and body movement along with the crying. And then, of course, this person that I was talking to, even though we were on screen, like, she was moved to weep as well. And that whole experience was an experience of joy. So it doesn't always just look like, not like, yay, which I am a lot of the time too, but it's
You are.
it's yeah, but it's all of that. It would be me sitting with someone who's super upset and feeling terrible about themselves, but I'm experiencing this complete intimacy with them, like no separation. And that feels like just the wildest joy, even though from the outside it looks like you might call it something else. So yeah.
I really thank you for sharing that story too about your friend. And I really loved what you said about our self-definition keeps us from being able to experience and see the joy. And what I envisioned when you said that was like you're hiding in bed and you have this big blanket over your head and it's super sunny and the most beautiful day outside, and yet in your bed under your thick blanket you think it's super dark and rainy and crappy outside, and if you just pulled the blanket back you would see that that was not what you believed about your experience.
That is a beautiful analogy. And I like it extra because it also describes how I spent so much of my life right up to probably the first half of my 40s. When I struggled so much with anxiety and depression, it felt like I was living my life exactly as you just described, not knowing there was any joy. All of my performance, I thought that was going to bring some sort of experience of joy. It's while I was living like that too. Some of you listening who have done work with me have heard this. It was a pivotal moment in my own, I don't even know what to call this anymore, journey. But it was while I was in grad school, and I think I was doing laundry somewhere public, maybe because I didn't have a TV. So I was somewhere where there was a TV, and Oprah was on, and whatever I was doing, I only just tuned in for like a couple of sentences that really rocked my world. And it was, all I heard was her ask the question, when is the last time you felt joy? Those were her exact words. I remember, even though it's like 30 years ago. And I was destroyed because I couldn't remember ever feeling joy, however I was defining it at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, holy shit, I've got to do something different. This is crazy that I can't, like, is that normal? That's what I was always asking myself. Is that normal that I don't have a story of feeling joy? Like, not one? That seemed crazy to me. And I thought I was crazy then anyway. So that went right along with my self-definition, right? And I think it was like maybe the next semester I graduated with my master's degree, and it was the worst day of my life. I've never been so disappointed because nothing changed.
Nothing changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Who knew that Oprah was part of your journey?
Yeah. Yes. Oh my. Yes, indeed. Oprah. I really had a kinship with her early in her career because of her story of her own, how she came by her own self-definition, you know, like the circumstances of her early life that I really resonated with. I just felt a kinship to her about that. My favorite story from her past, from her childhood, was that they ate cornflakes with a grape Kool-Aid on them instead of milk because they never had milk in the house. And she told that so matter-of-factly. I don't even remember when that was, but decades ago. And I'm like, yep, makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah. So yeah, that for sure was, that kind of like lit a fire under me, that moment that I couldn't think of a joyful moment. But back to your point, which is the reason I couldn't was not because there wasn't any. It was because I was so convinced of who I thought I was that it wouldn't have occurred to me to stick my head out from under the blanket. I didn't know how. And didn't know it was a thing.
Right. And if you think about like just pulling the blanket back and then, but yet feeling like you don't know how to do that, like from where we sit and with that analogy, like it seems so simple, right? Just fold the blanket back.
You have to know the blanket is there.
Right.
Right. That seriously, that's what I found out. And that's all that I share with other people on the simplest level is like, look at that blanket on your head. And they're like, what blanket?
Right.
That's really all I do. And because I learned to recognize them all for myself, and the blankets are all the same. Interestingly, you might think you have a completely unique self-definition, but you don't. That's how we're getting back to how the definition of being human plays into all this. There are a handful of definitions. We'll keep using that term. I like that better than belief. Belief sounds like something that comes that you don't have power in, you know, like, and so I like the term definition better. But there are just a handful of definitions that we all learned to see ourselves through. Like we learned, oh, I am this thing with these qualities. This is my name, Kathy the human, or Lisa the human, you know, and the human part is a huge part of our self-definition. And we all learned the same basic things, which is one of the million pieces of evidence that there is no individual in this world or life. Like we all are an expression of the same thing. And we'll maybe talk about that another time, but this is one piece of evidence for that, is that our self-definitions are all the same. I have not run into a single person that made me go, oh, what? You define yourself as what? And a way that I learned this was really working with the incredible women that we worked with at the recovery center where we worked. They could never stump me with a question or a struggle with how they were seeing themselves. Like, and they thought that that was so crazy and mystical and miraculous, but it isn't. It's because we all ask the same things. That's why I'm never stumped by their questions, because we are really very limited in what we need to question. It's just 2 or 3 things, basically. And they just happen to color everything we look at. So it seems like there are a lot of them, but it's just 2 or 3. And the biggest one is the one you already named, that we're not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is a pervasive one.
Yeah, it is. It's so let's revisit for just a moment my very oversimplification of how this happens. And please, if you're like me and you like to know the details of how things happen, look it up. But at the time that we're learning language, we learn all concepts, all of them. And where do we learn those from? The people who are around us at the time that we're learning language.
Mm-hmm.
Do they know that they're programming a self-definition into a left hemisphere that will color everything we see and do and experience after that? No, of course they don't. They're just trying to exist in the world. They're trying to get by with how they're seeing themselves in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what else would we learn except what people are doing around us? So if that's true, then that's where they also learn to define themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where they learn to define themselves. And, you know, all the way back to, I mean, when we were, I don't know, drawing horses on cave walls, I guess, or before, whenever language happened,
Mm-hmm.
we began to agree on meanings and pass it forward.
Right. And if we think about, like, children are looking to their caregivers, right,
Mm-hmm.
for guidance. So like that concept of learning what an apple is. And I know when I work with women on core beliefs, and I know you mentioned like belief in term of like reframing that to definition, which I like. Um, but from the clinical perspective for just a moment,
Sure,
when I'm
sure.
working with folks from on core beliefs, and that especially that one of not being good enough, you know, from very early on, especially like the toddler stage, when, you know, toddlers are into everything, right? They're climbing on stuff, they're picking up stuff and putting it in their mouth, they're doing all the things. Like, what are they most often hearing? Don't stop doing that. No, 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 right? And then you get into school and teachers are like, no, stop, that's wrong, you know. And so, I mean, it's understandable why we adopt these beliefs, because from those early stages of our life, where, I mean, we probably hear no more than anything else. And then we wonder why children say no, right? Like 2-year-olds. My daughter just came back from seeing her little 2-year-old cousin who she loves and adores. She's like, if I had $1 for every time he said no, I'd be a rich kid. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, they do. Why do you think they do that? Right? They're reflecting that back. And so, like, I think about people who are exploring these self definitions and wanting to look at it differently, and that shame piece comes up, right? Like, well, why do I believe this about myself?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how could you have not?
Exactly. How could you not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And along with that, I just realized as you were talking, another really important facet of this, the learning that you were describing, is that's also the time and place where we learn to look out from ourselves, always looking for what's not right,
Mm-hmm.
because that's been our whole experience for
Mm,
2, 3, 4, 5 years of people correcting us when we are not doing what others are doing.
right.
So we immediately pick up that way of seeing the world. And again, to go back to my simple statement, we experience what we look for.
Of
So
course.
so we pick up that way of being in the world. It's like we have to look out for what's not right, what needs to be fixed, what's not. Right and wrong is a huge thing, and what's grown up and what's not, and what's valuable and what's not, what's good and what's bad, what's yes and what's no.
Mm-hmm.
So we could say, you know, in terms of Eastern traditions, we learn the duality, and that brings me to a really important point about humanity.
Mm-hmm.
What you and I just described is a learning process.
Yes.
That is not something that you have to accept as a definition of being human.
Mm.
I was listening to a podcast the other day that I love, two brilliant people talking, and they must have said at least a half a dozen times between them, well, that's how humans are.
Mm.
That's what humanity is. And I was in my little cabin going, no, it isn't. I was like,
Doesn't have to
you're like,
be.
it's not. Every single thing we think we know is just a concept we learned. And why do we think we have to stop learning concepts and just stick with these ones?
Right. Right. Well, that's that shifting that perspective.
That's all it,
Right. Like,
all a shift in perspective is you trying on the possibility that something means a new thing as opposed to the old thing. And a fun example that we can use that I love, I bring up all the time, is that parents, for example, are just people who had sex. That's
I love
all.
this.
Yeah,
I love
it's
this. So
not
you
my
have to talk more about it.
it's not my opinion. I didn't just pull that out of my behind just now, that parents are just people who had sex. I mean, if you just take a breath or two right now, whoever is listening, and look and see, am I telling you something that's a fact or not? And I don't see how you could come to any conclusion except that it is an absolute fact.
Mm-hmm.
That two people who had their own self-definitions, their own ways of seeing themselves in the world, which 100% certainly included not being good enough
Mm-hmm.
and looking for what's wrong so they could fix it, certainly included those things. They have sex, they have a child. What in God's name makes us think that they could suddenly turn into these super creatures who can love their child unconditionally, who will understand them no matter what, who will want them to be anything they want to be, even if it's the biggest pain in the ass in the world, like, and who will provide for them financially, and who'll give them an education, and who will give them self-worth and self-esteem, and who will help them find their way in the world and understand all the complexities of being a human in this world. Why in the world would we expect that of them when they're just two people who happen to facilitate a sperm meeting an egg? And what would you, I'm talking to all of our listeners now, what could you be free of if you just accepted the truth of this definition?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because how many of you out there who are parents reflect your children's behavior or successes or failures or however they show up in the world as a reflection of your parenting?
Absolutely. And it's part of that definition that you
Yes.
say about yourself, which is,
Yes.
I have to see what's going well and what's not going well. You know why? Because it means something about me.
Yes.
It means something about my value and worth to my child and in the world. I share this with clients all the time, particularly the substance abuse clients, which is, every struggle of yours in this journey that you've been on with substances, every struggle says to your parents that they have failed you.
Right. Right.
And it has nothing to do with you. It's about
right.
them. It's about their own
Yes.
self-definition, and you can't fix it. And I say to them sometimes, if you miraculously transformed into Jesus, they would still see themselves the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely. Oh, so I just know this might like touch some people, in a way that may allow folks to question, like, that is an example of, really questioning that self-definition. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, using this parent uh, example, if you could just talk a little bit more about a way that folks could just be really concrete in their challenging of that self-definition.
Yeah. Do you mean like a how to do it, how they can
Yes.
question that? Yeah. So you just using that as an example, you can make a list. This is what I have my clients do. You can make a list of your disappointments in your parents. So I'm speaking from the child perspective now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can make a list of all the ways that your parents have disappointed you and angered you and frustrated you and made you sad, like all the ways. And that list will show you definitively which of the beliefs about parents you are still seeing them through. And then you can ask, what am I thinking this means about me? So if you have all those expectations of them and they're not living up to them, here's what you think. If you were a different child, they would have lived up to those. You
Mm.
think that their failure to love you unconditionally, or to not criticize you, or to not expect you to do things that you can't do, you think that's about you because you're seeing it through your self-definition. You're like, oh my God, if I was just, smarter, better looking, different gender, all the ways that we see ourselves as falling short as children of parents. You think if you were a different kid, they would have been different parents. And I'm asking you, like, now ask this question, knowing now how self-definition leads to every outward behavior, then you can see that your parents' behavior has nothing to do with you. It's coming from their own self-definition, just like yours is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a parent, the way that this can serve you is by noticing what your expectations of you are. Like, what were your beliefs about the kind of parent that a person should be? Write them down. Notice all the ways you have disappointed yourself as a parent by trying to fulfill those definitions that you were taught. And I'll say something here that's pretty controversial, and it's another aspect of the definition of being human. We talk about unconditional love. I was about to start stuttering because I have lots to say about this. I'm going to deliberately slow myself down. But one of the things that we aspire to as human beings, because we're taught that we are selfish, that we're self-serving, that we have egos that we always want to feed, that we have a fallen nature, that there's something innately wrong with us, that we're born into sin. That's a pretty long list, but there's more. But
Mm-hmm.
you get my drift of what we were taught. And then somehow we are also supposed to aspire to a state of selfless, unconditional love for others, especially for the people who are close to us. And so I'm going to make a bold statement here and say to you that no human being with the common definition has ever loved anyone unconditionally, because it can't be done. If you are seeing yourself as this fallen, this creature that has a baser nature, we could say, even folks who consider themselves very progressive in their thinking, sometimes say, well, often actually say that about human beings. Like we must work to educate ourselves and have a broader perspective, and to bring our baser nature, sort of to tame that, to bring that under control so that we can live from our higher nature, using very broad terms so you can fill in your own personally. But the truth is, as long as we are believing ourselves to have some sort of fallen nature, there is no way to overcome that definition and become this person who is capable of unconditional love. As long as you feel like there's something wrong with you, there's no way for you to stop trying to prove your worth by using other people. And that means you need something from them. If I need you to see me in a particular way, to approve of my choices, to validate my experience, to be on my side when I'm mad at somebody or something, as long as I need that from you, if I need anything from you, I cannot love you. because that's always all going to be mixed up in that self-definition of I'm not good enough as I am. There's something wrong with me the way I am. And so I have to constantly be looking for opportunities to overcome that. And that includes other people. That's why as parents, we want our children to behave, get it right, have a happy life, because I need to feel good about myself as a parent.
Mm.
And vice versa. It works the other way too. I know it might sound, maybe it sounds harsh to you to hear me say that a human with the normal definition is never going to love unconditionally. That's not going to happen. But I'm going to invite you to really let that be your practice this coming week, to notice how you define yourself as a human being comes into conflict with the possibility of unconditional love. Because I'm not saying that there is not unconditional love. I'm saying you can't experience that from the definition of human that is commonly accepted.
Mm. I'm writing this down.
Yeah. So it's important for us to look at that definition of being human that we learned. You may not be a person who even grew up in any sort of organized religion, but the notion that we come into the world with some sort of sinful or fallen or baser nature that we have to learn to bring into line with a higher self or a higher way of being, that is so pervasive. It doesn't have to come from an organized religion background at all. It seems to be something that we just picked up from what you were saying, Lisa, like when we were just little and hearing no all the time and constantly being corrected and assessed. Like it could just be from that. But as long as that's going on, that's what your experience of everything is going to be. We're back to your really excellent and helpful example of even seeing something as seemingly impersonal as someone who's doing a project for you deciding to move away as meaning something about us.
Mm-hmm.
But everything means something about us when we're holding on to that. Well, that's human nature. That's what I hear all the time. And usually they're
Mm-hmm.
referring to greed, dishonesty, looking to get an advantage over someone or some company or some country. It's having to always be ready for that, never trusting anyone else. I mean, having to have people really prove their trustworthiness, not trusting ourselves. Like defining being human by those rules is so detrimental to our interactions with each other.
Which really can be seen so dramatically right now in the world.
Absolutely. I was hearing a discussion yesterday about how it was Sebastian Junger, who's an anthropologist who's written and studied a lot about war. Phenomenal intellect, and his book Tribe was all about how the way that we have come to define and speak to each other with such contempt is the fruit that we are bearing because of that we are willing to be contemptuous of anyone who doesn't see from where we see. And then the reason that we do that is because we are seeing from that fragile, separate, can't trust anybody kind of definition.
And it's so rooted in that fear, right? Like fear of not being good enough.
Absolutely. All aggression comes from fear of not being good enough. All of it. Yes, I'm making a big old absolute statement, and I want you guys to notice if it's true in your lives. But I certainly haven't found any case of any person, body, I've tried to say both at once, of anyone behaving aggressively when they were not afraid.
So true.
And
Anything, not even just a human, an animal, any type of living existence that reacts from an aggressive place is reacting from a place of fear.
100% of the time. And I also hear people say, well, it's just human nature to be afraid. There's nothing we can do about that. Not so. Fear is an emotion that is created 100% from the way that you're defining yourself relative to the world. 100%.
So that makes me want to share something, if I may.
Oh, yay. Yes.
And I'm wondering, as I read this, and I recognize I haven't read this to you prior to this, so I'd be interested to know how this fits in or not.
Okay.
And this was shared with me by a client.
Mhm.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It's a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice.
I love all of that. And I see the absolute truth of everything except that danger is very real. Because the notion of danger comes out of that perspective of fear. And I know that she was probably talking about something physical and physical practical experiences. She's probably meaning to say, like, you know, if I were a soldier in Afghanistan right now, danger would be very real.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not saying that there are not situations in which your present moment might include something that feels like it's a danger to you. But 99.99999% of the time, even the danger itself is something that I'm making up in the present moment. And we use examples like I just did of an imaginary person being in a situation of danger to say, see, this is, or we might hear it on the news, or somebody tells us a story. And I'm not invalidating the experiences of anyone. I'm simply saying that if you start paying attention to your present moment, as this brilliant client suggests, if you start paying attention to your present moment, it is going to be so, so rare that your present moment includes danger. But we tell ourselves about it so pervasively that we imagine it's just around the corner all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So again, as I think I've shared on this podcast before, when I have clients who are fearful of something being dangerous to them, I have them do the very opposite of what's instinctive, which is look for the danger.
Mm-hmm.
When you suddenly feel afraid and like you're in danger, look for it. And let me know when you find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never had anyone text me and say, okay, smartass, I'm here and I'm in danger. Thank you very much. But nobody has done that. And I think that sometimes we want to hold on to scaring the hell out of ourselves because we think that seeing that the fear and the danger in the present moment are not real, we think that means somehow invalidating our history.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not at all what happens. When you realize that you're safe in this present moment, it gives you such a feeling of true admiration and compassion for the you that was in danger in your history.
Mm-hmm.
You have a safe present moment from which to see yourself in that history. And that changes everything about your experience of the past.
Mm-hmm.
This is how the past gets included in this work, because I don't, as I said to a new client I was interviewing yesterday, I said, we're not going to drag up all the most painful things that have ever happened to you and go through them again. And she goes, well, that's a relief. Because she's done that a lot and she still has some things that are really bothering her. And I said, then don't misunderstand me. We're not going to pretend like your past never happened. But we're going to so transform the way you see yourself in this present moment that the past then looks dramatically different.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And that's
Change
how
of perspective.
That's how that happens. Seeing yourself more truthfully and this present moment truthfully changes the way that you interpret your historical story as well.
Mm.
Go ahead.
So just as a quick disclaimer, just to let my listeners know I'm not breaking any confidentiality with my clients.
Oh, sure.
So that was just a screenshot of something that they found that they shared with me. That wasn't a direct quote from a client. I do
Sure.
want to just make that quick disclaimer.
Right. Right. We would always, we can make that disclaimer like for the forever future. If we were using the specific detailed experience of somebody or a quote from somebody, it would be because they told us it was okay to do so. Otherwise, even though I'm not a therapist, I also would do that definitely. And I have many clients, because of the kind of work I do, I have many clients who have said, if anything about this journey of mine is helpful to anybody, you're welcome to share, because it's different from them processing trauma and such, which, but still, I still do make sure I have their permission. So I understand that we are rapidly running out of time. So let's see if we can bring this together into something that's practicable for listeners for this week. So I would encourage you to notice and write down. Writing down is really helpful because it keeps you focused long enough to have a felt experience. That's really the most powerful thing about writing. So if you can notice and write down this week everything about your uncomfortable experiences that you are accepting as part of being human. If you feel afraid, if you think people are being assholes, if you're being an asshole, if whatever the experience is that is making you feel fearful or frustrated or resentful, feelings that we don't enjoy having, ask yourself this question: am I accepting this feeling because I think it's part of being human? And then ask, what if it isn't? So I'm going to give you a definition of human that I wrote for my daughter Ray, and I have a greetings card line that we have just started that we're working on and really enjoying, called Bright Ideas Greetings. And our slogan is say something real. So we're redefining some things and putting them on cards that folks can share with each other. And one of them is human. And the definition that I wrote for our card is, so human is on the front, and then the definition is inside. And the definition is the experience that your definitions allow. That's all that being human is, the experience that your definitions allow. So when you're feeling uncomfortable in any kind of way, if you stop accepting that and start asking, what if this is not mandatory because I'm human? What if it's coming from the way I'm defining myself in the moment? And then just notice how your felt experience changes. Celebrate, as I say to my clients. Yeah, notice and celebrate.
I love that.
So do we feel like we're like at a stopping point? As usual, we could talk the rest of the day, but
we could. So just to, because I love the way you've been ending our podcast, all joy all the time, because why settle for any less?
Yes. Yes, that's it exactly. Looking at your definitions will allow that. All joy all the time. Yep. So fun to be with you, Lisa, and with all of you out there somewhere.
Always.
Okay.
Thanks, Kathy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.